Hi everyone, welcome back to the White Coat Club. My name is Nicole and I'm one of the counselors at Moon Prep. Muskan is back with us today and we're going to be talking about what happens and what you can do if you don't get your top choice. We're going to talk about transferring, taking gap years, doing post-baccs. So don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and medical school advice. Hey Muskan, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Happy to have you back. We had some great guests to fill in for you for a little while, but happy that you're back.
Yeah,
So,
happy to be back.
so jumping right in, there's two different levels to this situation. There can be students who don't get their first choice straight out of high school, and then there's also students who are in college currently and are applying to medical school. So we're going to kind of break it down based on our individual expertise. So myself, coming from primarily working in a high school in undergraduate setting, we're going to talk about kind of the high school student first. So a lot of our students at this kind of moment are trying to figure out, or even when they're making their lists, how do you make something that you are going to have some backup options for yourself? So if you don't get into a BSMD, what do you do? If that was your choice, what are my other options? When we're making our college list, and we've discussed this on the podcast before, we really want to make sure we're having some backup options and having some traditional 4-year programs. And then, for the traditional route to medical school. So having some really great undergraduate options, and then picking that choice would, be a great route. A lot of students that do this route, they get some versatility on their applications to medical school because instead of taking that traditional BSMD where you're going to have, a biology major or a biomedical sciences major, some kids are going to traditional schools and traditional university paths and um, majoring in other things. I've had students major in English. I've had students major in humanities, in, political science. There's so many different things that you can do and then, be on the route to medicine later on. If you don't get your top choice for undergrad, transferring is always an option. We had a lot of questions about transferring. I don't love this route if it is in advance. I don't like this saying, oh, I will just transfer. Keep an open mind. It's definitely not a great route for students to say, well, I'll just go here and then I'll transfer. I think transferring is a fit for some students in the right moment. But I don't think it's something you want to kind of decide to do, commit to another school, and then, but in the back of your mind, say you'll probably transfer. If you're going to commit to a different school, go in with your all. Transferring could be on your mind, of course, but showing up on day one and saying your plan is to transfer is really just never a good look. Um, I've had students do it. It's just you don't really get to the full experience. You don't really get to commit to what you're doing. Your kind of mind is always elsewhere. Um, and it's just not the best way to even start because if you're going to transfer, you're going to need to have transfer, grades and scores in order for them to take you to that other school. So they're pretty strict about transfer GPAs. If you're going to that first university and you're not really in it all the way and you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to transfer, your performance might be lower. And again, it's just not the best route. So if you don't get into where you want, yeah, straight out of high school, I have had some students take some gap years. I have had a lot of students ask me about that. It's definitely not as popular. Um, I've definitely had more deferrals. And I think taking the gap year is really, really individual. It has to be, a very individual specific reason. And sometimes it's a good option for some, not always a good option for others. But we're going to want to apply out of high school, like apply in high school, and then potentially defer instead of saying, I'm just not going to apply this year and then applying later on. That's, definitely much more of the move for high school students. Um, but the kind of key here, if you don't get in, um, if you're working with someone like us or, a counselor, you're going to have some other great acceptances on your list and really work with them and us to navigate, what is that additional best route for you. And what might be your first choice now in 11th grade, in April might not be, or not April, May, June, July might not be your, number one in a year from now when you're getting ready to make that decision. Anything else to add to that, Uskan?
I mean, I think you did a really great job of covering that, Nicole. I think the big take-home message here is, be flexible, be open-minded. Don't try to really, cage yourself into one way of thinking. I also have had students go through the deferral process in the past, and it's been, a good choice for them. But, even if you're going to defer, I would say have something lined up, to do because you also don't want to spend, if you defer your acceptance a semester or a year, you don't want to spend that time doing absolutely nothing after high school. I would definitely recommend, either having a job or like having some sort of experience, even volunteering, travel a little bit, something to keep yourself engaged and, ready to start college because college is a huge transition. And if you're going from, not doing very much at all to all of a sudden having to manage your time and, kind of start from scratch on this really brand new but also exciting journey, you will struggle more if you didn't have a good routine going in. I think that's like the only thing I would add.
Yeah, that's a really great point as well. Okay, so what about the students who are currently in undergraduate universities? What are your kind of advice for them?
Yeah, so this is a really common occurrence, applying to med school from pre-med and perhaps not getting the interviews you wanted or not getting the acceptances you wanted in the first cycle. And it can be a difficult time to navigate through, but if you make good decisions alongside your counselor, you will set yourself up for success in the subsequent cycle. So the very first step in deciding what to do if you didn't get into a med school or if you didn't get into a med school that you wanted to get into is really trying to diagnose what went wrong. For a lot of students, this falls into one of three categories. It's either, academic, so it's like a GPA or MCAT. It's either clinical exposure or it's, not enough time and consideration given to the whole application process. Maybe you submitted your primaries late. Maybe you didn't give your secondaries as much thought and consideration as you would have liked to. Maybe you weren't able to schedule as many interviews as you wanted to. So we'll go through some of these like larger buckets of what went wrong and how to approach these, deficits in the next cycle. So first of all, if you think that your main issue was your GPA, which falls within the academic category, one good option is a post-bac. So this is something that students can do for a variety of reasons. One reason that students might do it, like I mentioned, is to bring up their GPA. If you took some science courses and you didn't do as well as you initially had hoped to do, this can help boost up your science GPA. And essentially, what a post-bac is taking classes after you're done with your college degree which don't result in a brand new degree, but rather help you boost that GPA, or get some exposure to material that you didn't get to study in college. Another reason that students might do a post-bac is if they're trying to make a career switch. So, there's plenty of students who maybe majored in engineering or business or law, and you even perhaps worked a few years after graduating from undergrad and decide to go into medicine. And at that time, you can decide to take a post-bac. So you make sure that you have all of your prerequisite courses for applying to medical schools, such as biology, chemistry, physics, all of your sciences. And you can kind of see what the requirements are based on the different med schools and their websites. But those are the big categories for what a post-bac is, and it's certainly a really good option if you think that one of the reasons that maybe you didn't get in your first cycle of applying was due to a low GPA or some sort of academic deficit. Um, MCAT is, a little bit easier to diagnose or, work around. If you feel like your MCAT was what held you back, simply restudy, retake the MCAT, and hopefully you get a stronger score, which will make you a more competitive applicant in the next cycle. The next big bucket is not enough clinical exposure, but you can really extend this to not enough exposure in general, whether it be clinical research or some other like extracurriculars such as volunteering that might be lacking in your application. These are also generally pretty easy deficits to fix in a potential gap year. If you have a lack of clinical hours, there's options of getting jobs such as medical assisting. There's also a lot of programs actually that are run through private clinics specifically for the reason of pre-meds getting more clinical exposure in their gap years by working as medical assistants or clinical assistants. And these programs are designed to give you training on the job rather than you having to pay for a medical assisting course or, undergo like a really strenuous training. For the most part, I've seen this in, derm clinics, ophtho clinics, which is ophthalmology, primary care, mostly in private clinic settings. But there are also larger hospital systems that have started to offer these positions. One, a really, really great one, which, I'm gonna kind of promo my school. I am a medical student in Cleveland, and University Hospitals of Cleveland actually just started a new program that allows students to get clinical hours in different specialty departments, such as ENT. So you get access to working in specialties that might not be available through these private practices. And another one that I know of is Northwestern University. And I'm sure there's other programs out there that you can apply to get your clinical hours up. And this is something that your Moon Prep counselor can also help with in identifying programs that would be a good match. If you feel like research is what's lacking on your application, you can work as a research assistant. These jobs are, pretty straightforward to find. You can just look up research assistant jobs in whichever city you're interested in. I've had friends and students do, research at excellent institutions in New York City, Chicago, DC. All of the big cities with big academic programs will usually have something you can apply to, which will be a great addition to your resume during your gap year. Another option for research is applying to a scholarship, such as a Fulbright or a Gates Cambridge scholarship. These are obviously very, very competitive, but if you have a Fulbright or a Gates Cambridge scholarship on your resume, that really, really helps with medical school admissions. Given the competitive nature of these applications, it would be a really good idea to not only get in touch with your Moon Prep counselor, but also your undergrad counselor, because you're going to need them to submit some forms for you in order to actually apply to these scholarships. But this is always a good idea. If this is something you're interested in, this is also something that you would have to think about in advance. These usually have deadlines in the fall before your gap year would start. So this is something that, if you are feeling as if your cycle isn't going as you wanted and you might not be getting the really like, competitive interviews that you wanted, it might be a good idea to also simultaneously apply to one of these scholarships while you wait for results to come out around October, November, December. Finally, you can also do a master's. This also helps with addressing any sort of academic deficit you might have had in your application. And there's 1 year programs, 2 year programs, and a variety of disciplines. Really popular options include master's in public health, master's in health administration. Some students will even get their MBA or like a master's in ethics. I personally got my master's in medical anthropology. So there's always options to do, additional education, which always will make you a more competitive applicant as well. And then finally, my last tip is in your next cycle, try to apply to a wider net of schools. Some ways you can do this is by adding DO schools as options or adding more schools in general. Medical school admissions really comes down to being a numbers game, and the more chances you give yourself for acceptance, the higher your chances will be. While I say this, I also want to add a disclaimer that if you add way too many schools, you won't be able to get through all of your essays. So work with your moon prep counselor to find out what is the right number for you and also to make a realistic college list or a realistic medical school list based on your MCAT and your GPA and your resume because your moon prep counselor will really be able to guide you on what's best and what will maximize your chances for acceptance in the next cycle. And those are kind of some of the options that our pre-meds have for applying to med school if things don't necessarily go your way in your first cycle. Nicole, do you have any other take-home messages for students to have before we conclude the podcast?
Yeah, I think, the overall message here is, you always have options and everyone's path is going to look a little bit differently. Really try not to compare yourself. You need to keep an open mind when things don't go according to plan A and really kind of embrace plan B, plan C. It's all going to work out, kind of following what would be the best path for you and really just not comparing. When things aren't going the way that you had hoped, take the time, reflect. I really like what you said earlier about like the very first thing to do if you don't get into your first choice is to kind of reflect and figure out what went wrong. What can you change? What can you adjust and shift? So I think reflection is like really key here. Redirect your plans as needed, and it's really never too late to reach out for help or ask for help, or nothing's really out of reach completely. There's always going to be other avenues for you. But other than that, it's an unfortunate reality, but we are happy to work with students through it. And, we have a lot of students that we do work with in this type of process. It's not just all high school students. It's absolutely kids who are kind of looking for their best route. So, again, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Check out our website if you are in this situation or in this process.